Hey there. Just a quick heads up before we dive in. This case gets pretty heavy, with some details that might be disturbing for certain viewers. So if that's not your thing, no worries at all. But if you're ready to go down this rabbit hole with me, grab a coffee, maybe some popcorn, and let's get started. Today our investigation takes us to Logan, Ohio, a small city in the United States with just over 7,000 people calling it home. It's the kind of place where you'd expect life to be quiet, predictable even. There are tree-lined streets with houses that look like they've been there for generations, and neighbors who still know each other by name. Trust me, in towns like this, routine is the heartbeat. Folks go to work, kids play in the yard, and on weekends, families head out to Hocking Hills, a state park nearby that draws hikers from all over for its waterfalls and sandstone cliffs. Oh, and before we really get into it, do me a favor. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what the weather's like there right now. I honestly love scrolling through and seeing all the places you guys tune in from, so don't be shy. I read every single one. Logan's history is tied to industry. Back in the 1800s, it was a hub for clay tile production, and remnants of that heritage still peek through in the old brickwork downtown. These days, though, the town's identity leans more toward tourism and community, local diners, seasonal festivals, and the kind of school football games that bring nearly everyone together on Friday nights. Picture the sound of marching bands echoing off small-town streets, the crisp Midwest air nipping at your cheeks, and the glow of streetlights on quiet evenings. It feels safe, right? Safe in that almost storybook way where nothing truly bad is supposed to happen. People let their kids ride bikes until the sun slips away, and there's this unspoken trust in the simplicity of small-town life. But let me tell you, beneath that calm surface, a storm was waiting. Because while Logan looks like the sort of place untouched by tragedy, the murder of 2-year-old would prove just how quickly a town's sense of safety can be shattered. The one thing that paints this city dark is the brutal murder of 2-year-old Ariana Starkey. On the night of January 8th, 2021, a call came into 911 from a young woman named Destiny Neal. She reported that Ariana, her boyfriend's daughter, was having trouble breathing inside their Logan home. Now, at first, it might have sounded like a medical emergency, something sudden, terrifying, but maybe explainable. Trust me, though, when first responders arrived and saw the condition Ariana was in, those initial doubts about what really happened began to creep in. Ariana was rushed to the hospital, machines working desperately to keep her alive. Imagine the chaos of that ER room, the beeping monitors, doctors moving quickly, the sharp scent of antiseptic in the air. For 2 long days, her tiny body fought, but she never regained consciousness. On January 10th, the life of this little girl slipped away. And here's the part that shook the community to its core. The story Destiny gave to investigators didn't hold up. Details changed. Explanations shifted. What was first described as a tragic accident started to feel like something much darker. The thought of it spread like wildfire through Logan, a small town where word travels fast. Neighbors whispered. Parents pulled their kids closer. The loss of Ariana wasn't just heartbreaking, it was horrifying. Because the truth wasn't that she'd simply stopped breathing. No. Something had been done to her, and the unanswered questions about what really happened in that house hung in the air like a shadow no one could shake. Ariana Starkey. Just saying her name reminds us that behind every headline is a real little person, a child with a smile and a story. She was born in 2018, the daughter of Austin Starkey. Only 2 years old when her life was cut short. Ariana was still at that tender stage where everything in the world felt new and exciting. Imagine the way toddlers light up when they see bubbles float through the air or when they get to wear their favorite shoes. Hers were bright pink boots she absolutely adored. She wasn't just somebody's child, she was the heartbeat of her small family. Ariana loved her big brother fiercely. They were inseparable, partners in playtime adventures that only siblings can invent. And trust me, if you've ever seen a little girl drag her brother into a tea party with stuffed animals and mismatched cups, you know how much joy that can bring to a household. Ariana's favorite moments were with her Nana, setting up those pretend tea parties, her eyes wide with imagination, her giggles filling the room. Her family saw her as more than precious. They saw her as the light in their lives. She had this way of making people soften, even on their worst days. A spark of sweetness, a burst of energy. She was the kind of child who could make you stop whatever you were doing just to listen to her laugh. And even at 2, her personality was already shining through. She was playful, stubborn in that cute toddler way, and full of wonder. She liked the little things, pink boots, playtime, the closeness of family. And yet those little things painted a picture of a life that could have been so big. Let me tell you, it's the small details that make this tragedy feel so unbearable. Her Nana remembers those afternoons with toy teacups spread across the living room floor. Ariana would serve everyone, smiling proudly, like she was hosting the grandest party in town. That memory, simple as it is, says everything. She wasn't just a victim of a crime. She was a little girl who brought light, laughter, and love into the world. And that's what makes the darkness of what followed almost impossible to comprehend. The date is January 8th, 2021, and the day was Friday. It started like any other Friday in Logan, but for Ariana Starkey, those hours would become the last chapter of her short life. Imagine waking up that morning, just a normal winter day in a small town. No one knew what was coming, not even Ariana. Sometime that afternoon, Ariana was at home with her father, Austin Starkey, and his girlfriend, Destiny Neal. Trust me, from the outside it probably looked like an ordinary family setting. A toddler playing in her boots, a father distracted, and a young woman trying to manage the day. But beneath that thin layer of normalcy, something wasn't right. By the evening hours, tension in that house seemed to rise. Around 7 p.m., Destiny would later say Ariana wasn't acting like herself. She appeared tired, maybe struggling. But her story kept shifting. One moment it was that Ariana had fallen, the next it was that she couldn't breathe. But let's leave these contradictions for later and also discuss how they haunt the investigators. At about 9:30 p.m., the situation became dire. Destiny called 911, reporting that Ariana was having trouble breathing. Imagine that moment, the panic in her voice, the weight of seconds stretching into eternity as dispatchers tried to pull details from her. Paramedics rushed to the scene, finding Ariana unresponsive, her tiny body fighting for every breath. She was rushed to the hospital, sirens blaring against the quiet of Logan streets. In the ER, doctors and nurses fought desperately to stabilize her. The monitors beeped, the air was tense, and in the middle of it all lay a 2-year-old who had her whole life ahead of her. By 10 p.m., she was on life support. For the next 2 days, her little body clung to life, machines keeping her heart beating while her brain showed devastating injuries. On January 10th, 2021, Ariana passed away. A detail that later struck investigators, and still chills anyone who hears it, was the visible trauma. Bruises, injuries that didn't match the stories given. Looking back, there were moments that feel like warnings. Neighbors recalled tension in the home, stories didn't align, and doctors noted injuries inconsistent with an accident. At the time, it may have seemed like confusion. In hindsight, it was a foreshadowing of the dark truth, that Ariana's final hours were not shaped by chance, but by cruelty. The first signs that something was terribly wrong didn't come from flashing lights or crime scene tape. They came from silence. Small, unsettling silences that grew heavier with every minute. Imagine being in that house when Ariana first stopped responding the way a healthy toddler should. The missed breaths, the limp body, the eerie quiet that must have set in. Trust me, for anyone who's been around a 2-year-old, you know their energy fills a room. When that's gone, it's terrifying. Destiny Neal was the one who made the 911 call, remember? Well, her voice pressed with panic as she said Ariana couldn't breathe. But almost immediately, the details she gave started to unravel. One story after another, never the same twice. At first, she said Ariana had fallen. Then it shifted, she had choked, or suddenly stopped breathing. The uncertainty wasn't the kind born of shock. It was the kind that made investigators lean forward and question every word. For Ariana's family, the worry turned into dread within hours. Austin Starkey, Ariana's father, was there, but his choices, his silence, his failure to intervene, would echo louder than anything he actually said. Meanwhile, Ariana's extended family waited for updates from the hospital, clinging to hope with every phone call. They sent texts, dialed again and again, hoping for a different answer, one where she woke up, smiled, and came home. Imagine her Nana that night, checking the window, pacing the floor, replaying the last moments she had with Ariana. Those tea parties, that little giggle. Each unanswered call twisted the knife deeper. That's how the night stretched. Minutes crawling like hours, the house filled with a mix of fear and denial. The contrast was almost unbearable. While family members were unraveling under the weight of worry, Destiny's behavior came across as strangely detached, rehearsed even. The story she gave didn't fit the desperation of the moment. And that gap, the gulf between a family in shock and a caretaker spinning inconsistent tales, would be the very first red flag that Ariana's death was not what it seemed. This was the moment the ordinary concern of a sick child shifted into the chilling realization that something far more sinister had happened. The silence of a toddler's laughter replaced by the silence of unanswered questions, and that silence was about to shatter when the authorities stepped in. The official involvement of law enforcement began with a single phone call, a call that would set the stage for unraveling everything hidden behind the walls of that Logan home. When Destiny dialed 911 on the evening of January 8th, reporting that little Ariana Starkey was struggling to breathe, the dispatcher logged the call, sending patrol officers and paramedics racing toward the address. Trust me, at that moment, no one could have imagined how dark this case would become. When first responders arrived, they didn't just see a child in distress. They saw a scene that didn't make sense. Imagine walking into a modest Logan home, the lights dim, a toddler lying unresponsive, and two adults whose stories seemed scattered and incomplete. Paramedics immediately rushed Ariana to the hospital, but officers stayed behind, noting details that would become crucial later. No clear signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no evidence of an accident like the one Destiny described. It felt too clean, too staged. At the hospital, detectives from the Hocking County Sheriff's Office joined the case. They spoke with doctors who made it clear Ariana's injuries were not consistent with choking or falling. The trauma to her head and neck told a different story. One physician described it bluntly. This was blunt force trauma, not an accident. Imagine the weight of hearing that, the way it instantly shifted the tone from medical emergency to suspected crime. Back at the house, investigators looked closer. They noticed inconsistencies, Destiny claiming one thing, then backtracking, while Austin Starkey stayed eerily passive, saying little. Officers documented everything. The clothes Ariana had been wearing, the items scattered around the living room, even the absence of things they expected to see. For example, where was the evidence of a struggle? Where were the toys she supposedly tripped over? By the time the night ended, one thing was certain. Ariana was fighting for her life in the hospital, and the story told by her caretakers didn't add up. The family's grief-stricken panic clashed violently with Destiny's faltering explanations. To the responding officers, this wasn't just a tragedy. It was the first unmistakable red flag. Something terrible had happened to Ariana, and the truth was hiding in plain sight. The investigation into Ariana Starkey's death quickly grew into something bigger than anyone in Logan could have imagined. Detectives began piecing together evidence, trying to separate fact from fiction, and trust me, every new detail raised more questions than it answered. Forensics came first. Doctors confirmed blunt force trauma to Ariana's head and neck as the cause of death. That alone changed everything. This wasn't a tragic fall or an accident. This was violence. Imagine the weight of those words landing on investigators' desks. Blunt force trauma, inflicted on a 2-year-old. Then came the timeline. Phone records showed exactly when the 911 call was made, but there were gaps. Hours before the call where no one could clearly explain what happened. Neighbors recalled unusual quiet from the home, even though Ariana was usually so lively. One neighbor thought they'd heard a thud earlier in the evening, but nothing was reported. Those missing hours became a black hole in the timeline, a hole detectives would try desperately to fill. And then there was behavior. Destiny's shifting stories stood out immediately. One moment she claimed Ariana had fallen, another time that she choked, later still that she just stopped breathing. Investigators noted how calm Austin seemed through it all. Too calm for a father whose daughter was on life support. Imagine that contrast. Family members sobbing in the waiting room while Austin sat silent, his partner scrambling for explanations. Obstacles piled up. There was no outside witness to the moment Ariana was injured. No surveillance cameras inside the house. Much of the evidence depended on what the adults said, and their words were riddled with contradictions. Detectives faced a wall of silence and half-truths, and in cases like this, that can be just as powerful as a weapon. Still, one thing became undeniable. Both Austin and Destiny had turned from grieving family to prime suspects. The moment investigators realized Ariana's injuries were not accidental was the same moment the case shifted. Austin Starkey, the man who should have protected her, was suddenly under suspicion not for what he did, but for what he failed to do. And Destiny Neal, the woman entrusted with care, became the focus for the blows Ariana had endured. The suggested motive? Frustration. A young woman overwhelmed, lashing out at a child who depended on her, while a father stood by in silence. Financial pressures, stress, resentment, these factors all swirled in the background. But still, the question remained. How could two adults allow this to happen to a toddler who just wanted to play tea parties with her nana and wear her pink boots? And that's the chilling turn investigators faced. The people who should have loved Ariana the most were now at the center of the case. The man who promised to protect his daughter and the woman who claimed to care for her had become the focus of a homicide investigation. But why? Why would a child's safe haven turn into her darkest nightmare? That question haunted Logan, and it still does. The arrest, when it finally came, didn't happen with sirens screaming through the streets or a dramatic chase. It was quieter than that, but no less heavy. On March 1st, 2021, just weeks after Ariana's death, both Destiny Neal and Austin Starkey were taken into custody. Let me tell you, the news hit the town like a thunderclap. Imagine waking up in a community where everyone thinks they know everyone, and then hearing that a father and his girlfriend were being accused in the death of a little girl. The prosecution laid out their case with a blunt, devastating clarity. Ariana's injuries weren't an accident, they were inflicted. Their thesis was simple. Destiny delivered the violence. Austin allowed it. And together they failed the one person who depended on them most. They leaned on the medical examiner's testimony that blunt force trauma to Ariana's head and neck caused her death. Doctors described bruises and injuries inconsistent with a fall, and those words painted a picture the jury couldn't unsee. Then came the testimony from law enforcement. Officers recalling the inconsistencies in Destiny's stories, the chilling absence of parental panic, and the details that kept shifting every time they pressed her for answers. Trust me, you could feel the walls closing in. The defense tried to counter. They claimed it was all a tragic accident, that perhaps Ariana had fallen or choked, and that Destiny's confusion came from panic. They even floated the theory that Ariana's injuries could have been worsened by frantic medical interventions. But against the weight of the autopsy findings, those explanations felt thin, like trying to hold back a flood with a paper dam. And then there was this smoking gun. Doctors testified with absolute certainty. The pattern and severity of Ariana's injuries could not be explained by an accident. It was intentional trauma. That testimony cut through every defense theory, leaving the jury staring at the undeniable truth. When the jury filed back into the courtroom, the tension was suffocating. The verdict? Guilty. Destiny Neal, found responsible for the death of a 2-year-old. Austin Starkey, guilty of permitting child abuse, among other charges. Imagine the silence in that courtroom. Family members holding their breath, waiting for the words they both dreaded and needed to hear. This wasn't just a trial. It was a community's reckoning. The moment when the curtain was pulled back and the full weight of what had happened to Ariana Starkey was finally spoken out loud. And as the gavel fell, the story shifted once again, from guilt to punishment, from courtroom battles to the raw emotions of a family left broken. The verdict was in, but what came next was the moment that truly broke the silence: sentencing. The courtroom was filled with heavy air, the kind that presses down on your chest, making every breath feel like a burden. When the judge announced the decision, there was no mistaking the finality in his voice. Destiny Neal was sentenced to decades in prison for her role in Ariana's death, while Austin Starkey faced his own punishment for permitting the abuse and failing to protect his daughter. Trust me, those words didn't fall lightly. For Ariana's family, it was like being handed a truth they already knew but never wanted confirmed. Tears fell, muffled sobs echoed through the courtroom, and for a moment, the proceedings felt less like justice and more like an acknowledgement of irreversible loss. Her family's reaction was raw, immediate. Ariana's Nana, who once sat with her at pretend tea parties, could hardly contain her grief. One family member's words struck everyone present. Asterisk, Ariana was our joy, our light. And in taking her, you didn't just end her life. You ended all the birthdays, the school days, the laughter we'll never get to hear again. Asterisk, imagine hearing that, knowing it came from a place of love so deep it can barely survive the weight of loss. The sentence was clear, but no prison term could balance the scales. The gavel came down, the court adjourned, and yet, the emptiness remained. The family walked out without their little girl, clutching memories instead of her tiny hand. That's the cruel math of justice in cases like this. Time served on one side, a lifetime of absence on the other. Outside the courthouse, the public gathered, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others stood in silence, their faces etched with anger or sorrow. Logan is a small town, and Ariana's name had become something everyone knew, whispered in kitchens, in grocery store aisles, in hushed conversations at church. People wanted to believe in safety again, but this case had changed that. Imagine it, a whole community realizing that even here, in their own backyard, innocence wasn't safe. The sentencing closed the chapter in court, but it didn't close the wound. For Ariana's family, justice had been spoken, but it would never feel complete, because no punishment, no matter how severe, could ever bring back the little girl who loved her pink boots and her tea parties. A case like Ariana Starkey's doesn't just end with the sentencing. It leaves behind ripples, scars that stretch far beyond the courtroom. Logan, Ohio, may look the same on the outside, but trust me, for those who lived through this tragedy, nothing feels as safe as it once did. In the months after the verdict, Ariana's story spread, reaching beyond Hocking County and into wider media. It wasn't just another headline. It was a reminder of how fragile life can be, how quickly innocence can be stolen. Families who heard her story hugged their children tighter. Neighbors began asking harder questions, checking in more, no longer assuming that everything must be fine just because a house seemed quiet. Imagine that shift. A town that once prided itself on trust now looking at the people next door with sharper, more cautious eyes. There was also the legal side. Ariana's death became a rallying cry in discussions about child protection and mandatory reporting. Cases like hers pushed authorities to look harder at how warning signs of abuse are handled and whether caregivers with histories of violence or neglect should ever be entrusted with vulnerable children. Every misstep in Ariana's short life became a point of reflection. What could have been done differently? What systems should have been stronger? But beyond policies and procedures, what lingers is the cultural impact. True crime communities, local advocates, and everyday people picked up Ariana's story, repeating it, not to sensationalize her death, but to keep her name alive. Podcasts, news articles, even social media posts ensured that her life wasn't reduced to just another statistic. And in that sharing, a small form of legacy was born, a determination to protect children like her, to say never again, even in towns that feel tucked away from tragedy. Of course, controversies linger. Some ask whether Austin's sentence was enough, whether permitting abuse should carry harsher weight when it costs a child her life. Others wonder if early intervention could have saved Ariana, if someone had spoken up louder, sooner. Those questions don't fade. They hang in the air like unfinished sentences, reminders of what still feels unresolved. And here's the hardest part to swallow. For her family, no cultural shift or courtroom ruling will ever fill the empty chair at Nana's tea parties, or replace the sound of Ariana's giggles echoing through the house. That's the real cost, the one that can't be measured in years or policies. So when we think about Ariana Starkey's legacy, it's not just about laws or headlines. It's about the lesson etched into the heart of a community, that innocence is fragile, that silence is dangerous, and that we all have a responsibility to protect the smallest among us. Ariana's story reminds us that safety is never guaranteed, but her memory can be the reason others are spared the same fate.